G'day, Keith here. Welcome to the Digger History Podcast. In this episode, I'll be talking about the Gallipoli landings on the 25th of April 1915, the day that would become known as ANZAC Day, a particular day of significance to Australia and New Zealand. In previous episodes of this series, I've spoken about the plan behind the Dardanelles campaign, how the Allies needed to open up the Dardanelles Straits to allow shipping into the Black Sea to support Russia, and also about the plan to take the Ottoman Empire out of World War II, thus taking pressure off another front in the war. I've also spoken about the nations involved in the campaign. So on the Allies side, we had the British, French, Australians, New Zealanders. I also didn't mention in the last episode, or I failed to mention that there was actually a Russian battle cruiser on the Allied side as well. So I apologise, I overlooked that. And on the Ottoman side, we had the Ottoman or the Turkish troops supported by German troops. So after a failed naval attempt to force their way through the Dardanelles Strait, an amphibious landing was planned, and the plan was to land on the Gallipoli Peninsula, take the Gallipoli Peninsula so that the shore batteries couldn't be used against the naval force, and then the Navy was to sail up the Dardanelles Strait to Istanbul, or Constantinople as it was called at the time, and open up the strait so that Russia could be supplied, and also take the Ottoman Empire out of the war. So it was thought that if Constantinople was taken, then the Ottoman Empire would surrender and give up on the war. So a force known as the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force was formed, consisting of British, French, Indian, Australian and New Zealand troops. And the Australian and New Zealand troops, known as the ANZACs, had actually been training in Egypt at the time, so they were then diverted, instead of going to England to take part in the Western Front, they were diverted to the Gallipoli campaign, which is how the Australians and New Zealanders ended up in this campaign. Now, the Allied forces were concentrated on the island of Lemnos, which is a Greek island about 100 kilometres away from the Gallipoli Peninsula. Now, originally the Gallipoli landings were scheduled for the 23rd of April, but because of bad weather, they were postponed until the 25th of April. If you're Australian like me, you probably heard this story lots of times at school growing up. The ANZACs landed 25th of April. They landed on the wrong beach. They were met with lots of enemy fire. They dug in for 8 months, and then 8 months later they were evacuated. And that's pretty much all I knew, really, for years. Growing up, a couple of stories about a bloke with a donkey called Simpson, or the bloke's name was Simpson. He had a donkey, and he was a medic, and he brought in wounded, and then we heard stories about ANZAC biscuits and things like that. But there wasn't a real lot of detail. Just basically, yeah, that was it. That's what we heard growing up at school. It wasn't until like as I got older and started researching more, that I got more of an understanding about what actually happened on the 25th of April 1915. But I'm going to go a bit mid-ground here with this. With this, I'm not going to be like as kind of vague as the stories we heard at school were, as oversimplistic as those stories. But I'm not going to go into like serious detail, because that would be like several podcasts of like hours long. So I'm going to take the middle ground with this in how much detail I put in. So let's talk a bit about the geography. So once again, as I explained in the first of this series, when I was talking about the reasons behind the Gallipoli campaign, the Dardanelles Strait is a small narrow body of water connecting the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. So it's kind of the only way in and out of the Black Sea. It's a narrow body, about 100 kilometres across. 100 metres across. I think I made that mistake in my last episode too. 100 metres across at its narrowest. So it's not very wide at all. And on one side you have the Gallipoli Peninsula, one side of the opening of the straits. So that's on the European side. So the straits actually form the border between Europe and Asia. So on the European side you have the Gallipoli Peninsula. So the plan was the bottom part of the Gallipoli Peninsula was Cape Helles, and it was the task of the British to land there, and they had five different beaches around Cape Helles that they were to land on. So the 29th Division were to land at Cape Helles, and then further up north, the ANZACs were to land at a place now known as ANZAC Cove. The landing was on the opposite side of the peninsula to the Dardanelles, and the task of the ANZACs was to take the ground across, like so land on one side of the peninsula, and then to essentially cut off the peninsula, so move across the peninsula, which was about 8 kilometres, and then isolate the Ottoman forces that were in the bottom part of the peninsula, so the British coming up from Cape Helles could capture that ground and essentially like take the whole peninsula. The French made a diversionary landing at Cum Calais. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. So that was actually on the Asian side of the Dardanelles. So just across the Dardanelles Strait, on the other side of the strait. Now these straits are pretty narrow. I think as an Australian thinking about straits, I think about the like Bass Strait, the body of water between the mainland Australia and Tasmania. But the Dardanelles Strait is definitely a lot narrower. You can see one part of land from the other side. So from the Asian side you can see Europe and vice versa. So yeah, definitely very narrow straits. So the beaches at Cape Helles that the British landed at, they were designated S, V, W, X and Y beach. And they were just designated those letters just to cause confusion, so that if enemy learnt about the plans, there wasn't any names of beaches, and the ANZAC's landing, the beach ANZAC's word to land was actually designated Z Beach. So we'll go into the ANZAC landing. So there were two divisions, the first Australian division and the New Zealand and Australian division. So about 25,000 men. So in general, and I'm really generalising here, the plan was the first Australian division was to land first, then to move inland and clear an area for the second division to land. Now on the night of the 24th of April, these soldiers were on 3 battleships, and the plan was they were to get into 2 lifeboats that would be towed by a steam tug. So the steam tug would tow the lifeboats, and there were up to like six lifeboats being towed by one tug, and 30 men per lifeboat. But back then there wasn't much in the way of designated amphibious landing ships, so this wasn't like the D-Day landings of the Second World War. There wasn't any boats that were specifically designed for amphibious landings, so it was kind of like make do with what they had. Around 4 a.m. on the morning of the 25th of April, the first wave of troops started moving towards the shore in their lifeboats, and yes, it's true that they landed too far north, about 2 kilometres too far north, and this is due probably to a number of errors, navigational errors. Obviously, navigating at sea at night isn't very easy, and if you're being fired at from shore, I guess that adds a bit to the difficulty. But the biggest trouble with this new landing site was the terrain was a lot more difficult than the site that was chosen. So as far as the Ottomans there, it wasn't actually garrisoned by that many. There was only 2 companies there garrisoning that particular area, but the terrain was just the terrain was on the Ottoman side. I haven't been to ANZAC Cove myself. I haven't had the honour of visiting Gallipoli and seeing the sites of these landings, but I've seen numerous documentaries and photos, and look, the landing area looks horrendous. There's like a small beach, and then there's cliffs, and yeah, I could only imagine like trying to get into those cliffs, get up those cliffs, get off the beach. So as the first Anzacs came ashore, they were faced with this narrow beach. They had to make their way to, the only way inland was like up these cliffs through narrow gullies, and like the gullies became natural fire lanes for the Ottomans. So and then there was the cliffs were like there were all these really spiky bushes that they called nature's barbed wire. You can imagine them like spiky bushes as you're going through some of the land in Australia. So I could only imagine what these spiky bushes were like. Pretty thick, dense, spiky scrub. The other issue with the landings was there was no proper structure in the way the the boats landed and came ashore. So the troops lost contact with their own units and were all mixed up, which caused confusion. So you can imagine the chaos. You've landed ashore. You detach from your own unit. You've got this short beach, and you've got to try and make your way up these cliffs and then you've got this dense scrub, spiky bushes. You can imagine like the confusion. On top of all of that, you're being shot at. You've got artillery raining down on you, rifle fire, machine gun fire coming down. Now, despite all of that, the ANZAC still managed to advance and in small units and take some areas, but the Ottomans counterattacked and repulsed it, and the Anzacs didn't manage to take any high ground. Well, they did take high ground, but didn't secure high ground. After the first day, there were around 2,000 Anzac casualties, and they'd barely taken a foothold off the beach. The commander of the 1st Australian Division, Major General William Bridges, and the commander of the Anzac Division, Lieutenant General Sir William Birdwood, both advised that the Allied forces be withdrawn from the peninsula, but this was denied. So that was the Anzac landing at Anzac Cove, the one that as Australians we're familiar with that story. But further to the south, Cape Helles, which is like basically the bottom of the peninsula, was to be the objective of the 29th Division. So the British, including the Indians and Gurkhas. So as I mentioned before, there were five beaches that was the landing beaches of the British. There was S, V, W, X and Y beaches. Now on one of the beaches, they actually overcame or adapted to the problem of not having any suitable landing craft, and they actually had an old converted collier vessel, the SS River Clyde, which they converted into a makeshift landing vessel. So I guess that was one of the first landing vessels that was specifically, I won't say designed, because it was a coal vessel, but it was converted to be a landing craft. At these landings, there was a mixture of heavy fighting and some kind of I guess easier fighting where there wasn't much in the way of defence. But the issue with these landings were there wasn't enough kind of people high up that were to take charge and coordinate the effort, so they kind of fell apart and lost the momentum. At W Beach, the Lancashire regiment, so they had 100 men. They had 600 casualties, but they managed to overwhelm the defenders, and six Victoria Crosses were made to those Lancashires at W Beach. So 6 Victoria Crosses before breakfast is their claim. As I said, like after the landing, even though there was some progress made, not much was done to exploit the situation, and the attack lost its momentum, and like at ANZAC Cove, the British ended up digging in and getting bogged down. So in both ANZAC Cove and Cape Helles, it ended up being a stalemate that lasted for the next 8 months, which was exactly what the Allies had not wanted. They didn't want another Western Front. Western Front was also in the stalemate. The Allies had hoped for a Swiss victory at Gallipoli, which was not to be the case. So, like the Western Front, the only difference is it was the Germans that they originally attacked. They were hoping for a swift victory by taking Paris by going through Belgium, and they didn't anticipate the resistance, and it ended up being a stalemate on the Western Front. So like on the Western Front, Gallipoli also became a stalemate. And another big attempt was made by the Allies in August of 1915 to break that stalemate, but that's for another podcast. In December 1915, the ANZACs evacuated Gallipoli, and it was as opposed to the landing at Gallipoli, the evacuation was well planned, well thought out, and the most successful part of the whole Gallipoli campaign. But once again, that's a story for another podcast. In all, on both sides of the campaign, over 110,000 soldiers were killed, including 8,709 Australians and 2,721 New Zealanders. For the ANZACs, these numbers pale in comparison to the losses of the United Kingdom and the Ottoman Empire, but the populations of Australia and New Zealand were quite small at the time, so it was quite a significant number. The population of New Zealand at the time had only just exceeded 1 million people, and the population of Sydney was about 750,000. So even back then, they were quite small nations. After Gallipoli, Australians and New Zealanders went on to fight in the Western Front in France and Belgium, and the numbers of casualties in Gallipoli pale in comparison with the numbers on the Western Front. So on the Battle of Fromelles, which is called the bloodiest 24 hours in Australian military history, the 5th Australian Division suffered 5,533 casualties, including 1,900 killed. So in that one day on the Western Front, nearly a quarter of the numbers were killed in that one day that were killed on the whole Gallipoli campaign, 8-month campaign. So for the ANZACs and the soldiers that survived Gallipoli to then go on to fight on the Western Front in what was a much bloodier campaign, it would just be unbelievable to survive Gallipoli and then get thrown into the trenches of the Western Front. And the Western Front, Australians on the Western Front, I've mentioned that in a previous podcast. I'm working on that podcast, but it is a series because there's a lot involved in it. So that's a podcast series that I'm working on that will be out soon. So that brings my my podcast to an end here. About the Gallipoli landings. Thanks for listening. I do hope you got something out of it, and if you enjoyed it, please follow me, leave a comment, give me a rating on your podcast provider. It all helps with the promotion of the podcast. If you have any comments or anything that you'd like me to do a podcast on, please pop in the comments below. I'm actually recording this podcast. It's the 24th of April 1915, so it's the day before ANZAC Day. I'm off tomorrow morning to go and play bagpipes at ANZAC services. So I have 3 different services to play at tomorrow. So I'll be doing a dawn service, and then travelling further up north to do another service, and then travelling a bit more to do a 3rd service. So it is a great honour to be invited to play bagpipes at these services. Some very solemn occasion, and one that I practice quite a bit for. You kind of want to get these things right. You don't want to be making mistakes at these occasions. So I do quite a bit of practice. Probably drive my neighbours nuts. But yeah, I'll be up there in the morning, playing bagpipes at these services. Thank you again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next podcast. See ya.